Is there hope?
All things are possible through him.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're doing something a little different. We aren't just analyzing a stack of historical or legal sources.
No, we are entering what our documents are calling a war room.
Exactly. Our mission today is immediate and very specific. We are deploying what's known as the Vanguard Legal Defense Doctrine.
And that doctrine, it's drawn primarily from two key sources we're looking at. The first is the Scourge Lexicon.
Right.
And the second is the Gemini Legal Fiction Report. And together, they serve a really singular purpose.
What's this?
To provide you, the listener, with what they call the cipher keys. The keys needed to understand and, at least in theory, dismantle the system's hidden language.
So this is very much a tactical briefing. The central idea, the core tenet of these sources, is the belief that our entire system, courts, economics, government interactions, it all operates under a set of, well, intentionally obfuscated definitions.
Exactly, obfuscated. We're assessing what they call the threefold chord strategy. You have the will, which is directed at commerce.
Okay.
You have the intel, which is this coin Greek ammunition we're going to be talking about. And then you have the strategy, which is how you package that weapon.
The strategy is built on exposing what these sources find as the ultimate swap, right? The reduction of our dominion to debt.
And sonship to slavery. A legal economic slavery. We've got three critical battlefields ahead of us today, and we have to start with the most essential one, identity.
All right, let's get into it. We begin with something the sources dramatically refer to as the legal nuke.
A legal nuke, yes.
The absolute necessity of unmasking the person. Now, in the eyes of this doctrine, the legal system relies entirely on one single concept to exert its jurisdiction. And that concept is the prospon.
Pro-SOH-bun.
So what exactly are we dealing with here? When the law talks about a person, what does that mean according to this doctrine?
Well, the prospon is the trap. The corrupted gloss, that's the modern, everyday legal definition of person. It's not the human being.
It's not you or me.
Not at all. It is an abstract legal entity, a role, or, and this is the most critical part, a mask. It's totally detached from the true living self.
And the state uses this to create fictions.
Fictions. This is the whole foundational concept behind how corporations are created. And for the sovereign citizen movement, it's the exact mechanism the state uses to create the legal straw man.
So it's not the man, it's the avatar of the man that the state has jurisdiction over. And what I find fascinating is how cleanly the etymology of the word actually supports this claim.
It supports it perfectly. I mean, prospon literally means face or appearance, but its deeper root is in ancient Greek drama.
The theater.
The theater. The prosponon was the theatrical mask an actor wore. It's the apparatus through which the voice of the actor sounds. So pro means through, and sopon means voice.
So through the voice.
Right. It denotes the outward presentation, the role that's being played, but it is explicitly not the actor underneath. It's not the inner essence.
And the doctrine claims the judicial application of this is, well, surgically precise. The court never charges the man.
Never.
It always charges the prosopon, which is associated with the name written in all SAP PS, the so-called paper doll.
That is the absolute cornerstone of the entire argument. When you get a document in the mail, a summons, a bill, and it's addressed to John H. N. DOE in all capital letters, you are not, according to this doctrine, receiving a summons directed at your living, breathing essence. You are receiving a summons addressed to the legal fiction, the mask, the commercial entity created by the state.
And that creation happens when?
Usually upon the issuance of your birth certificate. That's the moment the paper doll is born into the system of commerce.
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Surely the law sees the name and recognizes the individual behind it. If I go to court, I am me.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't matter how the letters are capitalized, right?
Yeah.
Why does this doctrine insist that just acknowledging that all SAP PS name is an act of consent?
Because of a concept called attornment. It's a very specific legal idea. If the court addresses the corporate fiction, the prospon, and the living man stands up and says, yes, that's me.
He's just answered a question.
He's done more than that. In this pseudo-legal framework, he has just contracted to assume all the commercial liabilities and all the statutory jurisdiction attached to that corporate shell.
So he's consented. He's agreed to wear the mask.
He's consented to wear the mask and play the role that the court has defined for him. The mask is being charged, and the man is volunteering to take on the responsibility.
Okay, that clarifies the trap. So here's the kinetic weapon against this mask. The defense is to identify exclusively as the anthropos. That's anthropos.
The anthropos. This is what they call the purified definition. It is the full human being, living, spiritual, physical man.
All of it.
All of it. The sources make a big point of its derived etymology. It's sometimes traced from ana, meaning upward, and ops, meaning facing or sight.
Upward facing.
This upward-facing orientation is meant to suggest the whole substance, body, soul, spirit standing in a direct relationship to the king or to a divine authority.
Which means it's subject only to common law or divine covenant.
And not statutory commerce law. That's the key.
The crucial point in the defense, then, isn't just knowing the word. It's about actively deploying that separation in the moment. So what is the prescribed verbal defense? How do you apply this in a legal setting?
The doctrine dictates a very, very precise response. It's often called the guardian's reply. It goes something like this. You are charging the mask, the prosopon. I am the man, the anthropos.
Okay.
The mask cannot speak. Only the man can speak. And the man does not consent to this jurisdiction.
And that refusal of consent is the jurisdictional shield.
That's the shield.
I see the power in that distinction. God respects the man, the anthropos, the essence. But the state, operating in this alleged legal fiction, only has the mechanism to arrest the mask, the prosopon, the role.
Exactly. And the sources love to cite Galatians 2.6, where it says that God is no respecter of persons.
Right.
The lexicon we're using translates this phrase directly. God is no respecter of prosopon.
Of the mask.
Of the mask. It means divine judgment looks past the status, the role, the wealth, the presentation you offer to the world. It judges the internal essence, the full man.
So if you can establish your identity as the anthropos in a court of law, the doctrine claims you have fundamentally revoked the court's primary mechanism for jurisdiction.
You've pulled the rug out from under them.
That makes the identity trap the absolute non-negotiable foundation of this entire defense doctrine. If the man answers for the mask, the game is over before it even begins.
It's checkmate on the first move. And to really grasp the gravity of this identity trap, we have to dedicate some serious time to the historical trajectory of the prosopon and its Latin counterpart persona.
Right, this didn't just appear out of nowhere.
No, the doctrine views this history as a deliberate, multi-millennial effort to reduce the living human being into basically a legal accounting unit.
Let's trace that genealogy. We've talked about the theatrical roots in Greece, but how did that mask become legal currency?
The shift really happens as the concept migrates into Roman law. Persona became the fundamental unit of legal standing. The key idea remains separation. The mask, the role, is separate from the actor.
So one person could be multiple legal persons?
A single biological individual, a homo, could hold multiple personae. He could have the persona of a father, the paterfamilias. He could have the persona of a soldier or a magistrate.
But crucially, what if you didn't have one?
Well, that was the trap. If you were a slave or an infant, you had no persona, which meant you were legally invisible to the law. You were just property, a thing, a res.
So the state only recognized the role, not the inherent humanity. This naturally leads us into the Roman status trap, capitis diminutio, which the doctrine links directly to modern capitalization. This is where the conspiracy framework gains its historical gravity.
It really does. Capitis diminutio means the diminution of the head, or the diminution of status. It described the formal process of losing your legal standing in Roman civil law.
And the sources are arguing that this ancient concept is subtly encoded in modern documents to this very day.
That's the claim, encoded in plain sight.
Let's break down the three losses, because this detailed analysis is essential to understanding the doctrine's claim of systemic enslavement. Where do we start?
We have to start with the most extreme. Capitis diminutio maxima, the greatest loss.
Maxima.
This meant the total loss of liberty. You were reduced to a slave, a mere commodity, a res. You were no longer a person in any legal sense.
And this status, according to the source material, is what is signified by what?
By the name written in all capital letters, John Doe. The doctrine views the use of all caps on a passport, a driver's license, a court summons, as the textual evidence, the sign that the citizen is viewed legally as a piece of property, a corporate asset of the state.
That's a very powerful claim to make about what most people see as just a simple typographical convention.
It is. But in this worldview, there are no coincidences.
Okay, so how do they interpret the second status reduction, the middle one?
That would be capitis diminutio media, the middle loss. This meant the loss of citizenship, so you might be exiled, but you retained your personal liberty. You weren't a slave.
And the typographical sign for this is?
The sources interpret this as the name written in initial caps, so John Doe. This signifies a subject status, maybe a non-citizen or a foreigner, someone who retains some rights but is still subservient to the state's regulatory framework.
And finally, the status the doctrine aims for. Capitis dimitio minima, the least loss.
Right. Minima was just a change in family status, a legal technicality within the household, like an adoption. This status is interpreted as the position of the living man, operating fully under common law or the law of the land.
And how is that represented?
It's often represented by stylized names, like John of the family Doe, something that breaks the standard grammatical structure to signal a different legal standing.
We have to pause here, because this is where impartial analysis is just so crucial. We've presented the doctrine's interpretation, and it's internally consistent and fascinating. But we must robustly address the modern legal counterargument, which just dismisses this Roman link entirely.
Absolutely. We have to. The vast, vast majority of legal scholars and practitioners view this entire capitalization link as, well, as specious, a modern fiction that's been applied retroactively to Roman law.
So what's their explanation for the all-seek-EPS?
It's purely pragmatic. They state that the all-caps name is just a standard typographical convention. It dates back to the days of early data processing, teletype machines, and early computer forms where only capital letters were easy or even available to print.
So it's for data clarity, not for legal reduction of status.
That's the mainstream view. It's a technical formatting choice for legibility and to avoid errors in databases.
But for the adherents of the doctrine, the visual form is the definitive sign of the beast.
Correct. For them, the symbol is the substance. They will prioritize the literal interpretation of this specific visual symbol, the all-see-EPS name, over any modern pragmatic explanation about typography.
And they would say that the mundane explanation is itself part of the cover-up.
Of course. It's part of the deception designed to hide the enslavement mechanism in plain sight.
It's a very elaborate and, you have to admit, compelling structure of belief. Now let's move to how the persona made that crucial leap from ancient status law to the modern corporate entity, which created the ultimate straw man. The sources point to a theological bridge that made the legal leap possible.
This theological bridge is absolutely key to the whole history. When the early church fathers were trying to explain the Trinity, they needed a concept.
Right, how to describe three in one.
And they adopted the Latin persona. They used it to define the Trinity, three personae, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, all sharing one divine substance.
And in doing so, they established a major precedent.
A huge one. They established that a distinct mode of existence could be separated from the underlying substance. This concept of a non-corporeal, distinct legal existence paved the way for the persona ficta.
The fictitious person.
The fictitious person,
Yeah.
which is the direct legal ancestor of the modern corporation.
So the person became a container of rights, separate from the mortal human. A way to manage things that aren't physical individuals, like a guild or a town.
Precisely. And the high watermark of this transformation, the event that supposedly cemented this fraud in American law, is the 1886 Supreme Court case, Santa Clara County v. Southern Pacific Railroad Co.
This is the infamous headnote conspiracy. Let's detail the facts of the case first before we get to the conspiracy part.
Okay, so the case itself was a tax dispute. It was about whether a county in California could impose property taxes on a railway. The core legal question, which the court actually ended up sidestepping, was whether the 14th Amendment,
which was passed to grant equal rights to formerly enslaved natural persons.
right, could that amendment be applied to corporations? Justice Waite delivered the majority opinion.
But the conspiracy, the whole theory, hinges entirely on a specific insertion into the published report, not the written ruling itself.
That's where all the drama is. The court reporter at the time was a man named J.C. Bancroft Davis. Now, Davis had previously been an official with the Southern Pacific Railroad.
Oh, that's interesting.
It is. When the case was published, Davis inserted a clerical headnote, which is just a summary that precedes the judicial opinion, and that headnote stated, quote, "The defendant corporations are persons within the intended meaning of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States."
It's just astonishing that this entire legal framework, in the doctrine's view, hinges on what amounts to a rogue clerk's footnote.
And that's the narrative. Subsequent courts treated this headnote as if it were the official binding precedent, even though the majority opinion had specifically declined to rule on that very constitutional question of corporate personhood.
So for the sovereign citizen, this is the smoking gun.
It's the undeniable proof that secret agents, a compromised court reporter, rigged the system. They elevated the dead, the corporation, the fiction over the living, the man, through clerical sabotage.
And this historical corruption leads directly to the ultimate structure, the straw man theory.
The straw man theory is the summation of this entire history. It alleges that the state, through the registration of the birth certificate, created this juridical person, the straw man, the John Doe, the corporate shell, which is now subject to statutory law and all commercial liability.
And the trap is sprung when the living man answers the summons addressed to the straw man,
Thereby performing that act of attorning and accepting its liabilities. The Anthropos defense is designed from the ground up to identify and reject this entire historical chain of deception.
Fascinating. So once identity is secured, man over mask, we have to transition to the next tactical front, the transaction trap.
Indeed. We now move from identity to relationship, and the two competing forms of legal agreement that define whether you are free or bound.
The system's contract versus the kingdom's covenant.
This is the second kinetic weapon from the Scourge lexicon.
And the system, according to this doctrine, relies almost exclusively on the synthetica. That's synechy. This is the contract.
Yeah.
What is the fundamental problem with the synthetica?
Well, the core problem is that the synthetica is defined as being rooted in one thing: mistrust. It's a binding deal for mutual gain, enforced by courts, and it's always conditional upon both parties holding up their end.
And if one breaches, there's a penalty.
A penalty, a fine, a termination. The parties haggle like merchants to try to gain an advantage. The state, the sources allege, uses this concept to demote our inalienable inherited rights into mere revocable privileges.
I see. So things like a marriage license, a driver's license, or even a health mandate, they become conditional agreements, a syntheky that can be withdrawn or penalized by the state. They aren't fundamental rights that can't be revoked.
Exactly. The source material notes that the legal structure is constantly trying to force the living man into a social contract relationship, a synthetica, a fragile, conditional treaty between two non-trusting entities.
And the original Greek word supports this idea of fragility.
It does. Syntheke denotes a temporary agreement, like a truce in a war. It's always subject to change based on market conditions or leverage. The ancient historian Thucydides used it all the time to describe political treaties that were, made to be broken.
The counterweapon then is the diatheka, diatheke. This represents the covenant, which must offer total relational security.
It offers total security because of its very nature. The diatheke is the purified definition. It's the unbreakable will or testament. And critically, it is a one-sided disposition from the superior, the father or the king, to the heir.
That distinction is profound. A contract requires mutual consideration, a give and take. A will is a unilateral declaration, a gift.
And this will, according to the doctrine, is sealed in blood, not ink. The sources really emphasize the theological and legal mechanisms cited in the Book of Hebrews, noting that the death of the testator is what activates the inheritance.
Which suggests a fusion of essences, a total and irreversible granting of dominion and heirship, rather than just a transactional agreement.
Not an exchange of favors, but a change of status.
So if the system tries to enforce a commercial agreement based on mistrust, the diatheka argument reframes the relationship entirely. It becomes one of established, inherited, and unbreakable dominion. What is the defense application in practical terms?
The defense is one of prior superior allegiance. The guardian replies, I am under diatheka. My allegiance is blood-bound to the king, sealed by testament.
Okay.
I cannot sign your syntheka because it violates my prior union and my inherited status. The claim is simple. The blood overrides the ink.
It's an assertion that the commercial jurisdiction of the state, which is based on negotiable contracts, simply cannot touch the spiritual and inherited jurisdiction of the covenant.
And the usage example they always return to is the definitive reference point. Haikena diatheka entu haimatimu, the new covenant in my blood.
So by identifying with this concept, the doctrine argues you remove the entire interaction from the commercial jurisdiction, rendering their syntheke null and void.
You're not playing on their field anymore.
The identity trap is solved by anthropos. The relational trap is solved by diathoko. This leads us perfectly into the third and final trap, the economic reality.
This is a third kinetic weapon, what they call the economic shield. The doctrine addresses how the living man interacts with the material world, the realm of commerce and debt, and it seeks to shift his role from a merchant to a steward.
And the trap exposed here is the emporos, M-P-O-H-ros. We all recognize the idea of a merchant, but the corrupted gloss presented in these sources is far more damning.
Oh, much more. The emporos is the profit seeker, the traveler trader. This figure is defined by the necessity of buying low and selling high, of turning everything into merchandise. The system, through modern economics, glorifies this free enterprise pursuit.
But the doctrine views it as fundamentally exploitative.
Exactly. It cites the biblical example of selling doves in the temple. It's about commodifying the sacred.
And the greatest defense, according to the sources, is the reduction of human beings themselves to mere units of consumption and transaction.
Precisely. The sources deliver a fierce critique here, citing the book of Revelation, chapter 18, where the merchants of Babylon mourn over the loss of their cargo, and that cargo explicitly includes the bodies and souls of men.
So the system, this doctrine alleges, treats the listener not as a sovereign entity, but as a consumer.
A consumer, someone who exists purely to transact, to incur debt, and to drive commerce. If you consent to be the emperos, you consent to be treated like cargo.
This is a profound ethical challenge that the doctrine is posing. If you operate as a merchant, you are operating in the volatile, high-risk world of commerce, and you're subject to all its liabilities.
You're subject to the law of the sea, the law of commerce, and the solution, is to become the oikonomos, iko-enoechasis, the steward.
So what is the purified definition of this steward?
The oikonomos is the household manager, literally someone who manages the oikos, the house or household. This person is entrusted with the king's resources, not to hoard them or sell them for personal profit,
but to distribute them justly?
To distribute justly, they guard the assets, ensuring the well-being of the house. The sources cite Luke 12, referencing the faithful and wise steward who feeds the household at the proper time.
This distinction provided in the Lexicon is a masterpiece of antithesis. It says a steward owns nothing but rules everything because he acts as a king's agent.
Whereas a merchant owns everything, all his goods, but ultimately keeps nothing because his assets are volatile and subject to market forces and the law of the sea.
The defense application here seems revolutionary in its scope.
It is. By declaring, we are oikonomoi stewards of the mysteries, citing 1 Corinthians, the living man theoretically breaks the debt system.
How so?
As a steward, you cannot legally incur personal debt on assets that belong to the king. Your accountability shifts entirely. It moves away from the statutory creditors of the state to the superior authority who entrusted you with the management in the first place.
This connects directly to the origin story of the movement, the idea of cleansing the temple. The reference to John 2, where Jesus drove out the emperoi from the oikos to patros. Make not my Father's house a house of merchandise. That's the foundational image.
It's the core metaphor. The emperos defiles the house by turning it into a marketplace where souls are transacted. The oikonomos guards it from that commercial degradation. By adopting this identity, the doctrine asserts that the living man shifts his entire economic relationship with the state.
From that of a commercial debtor, the proselyte,
to that of an asset manager accountable only to the true sovereign, the anthropos.
We have now established the three Koine Greek weapons, anthropos, diatheke, and oikonomos. Now we have to examine the specific real-world legal fictions these three tools are meant to combat. This is where the ancient linguistic claims meet the modern pseudo-legal reality.
This section is what ties the entire framework together, and it starts with the foundational myth that's used to explain why the anthropos is subjected to debt in the first place.
And that is the Cestui Que Vie Act of 1666.
Or, as it's better known in these circles, the Lost at Sea Warrant.
Let's dedicate time to the historical reality first, because the distortion here is vast. What was this act truly designed to do?
The Cestui Que Vie Act of 1666 was a really pragmatic piece of English property law. It was enacted right after the Great Plague and the Great Fire of London.
So a time of massive chaos.
Total chaos. Land tenure was often complicated. Land was sometimes held for the duration of a specific person's life. That person was the Cestui Que Vie. With so many people having vanished or fled beyond the seas during the disasters, landlords had no way to prove a tenant was dead.
And therefore they couldn't reclaim the land.
They were stuck. So it was a rule of evidence designed to resolve these specific land tenure disputes when tenants had been missing for 7 years. It allowed the presumption of death for property management purposes.
But it also had safeguards.
It explicitly safeguarded the property and all the profits should the missing person actually return.
So it was narrow, practical, and contingent. However, the sovereign citizen doctrine takes this narrow statute and warps it.
It warps it into a universal malicious declaration against all of humanity.
The distortion claims that the 1666 Act declared every single person legally dead, or lost at sea from the moment of their birth.
Yes. The argument is that since you are considered legally dead or lost at sea, the state, acting as the maritime sovereign, seized your estate, your body, your labor, your assets, and now holds it in a sestuique vi trust.
And the living man is therefore merely the resource being managed by the state as a trustee.
You're just chattel in their trust portfolio.
This lost at sea narrative is so critical because it acts as the necessary connective tissue. It's what allows the shift of the entire legal system from the law of the land or common law
to admiralty or maritime law, the law of the sea, the law of commerce.
And the doctrine holds that all modern courts and governments operate exclusively under admiralty law because the population has been reduced to commercial cargo.
And this framework is then supported by these highly elaborate linguistic movers playing on homophones to prove the maritime jurisdiction.
These metaphors are all detailed in the Gemini Legal Fiction Report. Talk us through some of the connections they use.
The whole belief system relies on decoding everyday words to reveal hidden maritime terms. For instance, the hospital where you are born is located in the berth.
Born, birth. Okay.
The attending physician is sometimes decoded as the dock oar. The defendant standing in the court dock is the cargo being adjudicated.
There's a whole new language.
The act of being born of water from the mother's womb is cited as prima facie evidence of your immediate entry into maritime jurisdiction. It's a complex, internally consistent tapestry, even if it's rejected by all external legal bodies.
And the entire purpose of this maritime jurisdiction and the sestuique vi trust is to explain the debt system.
It is. The birth certificate is viewed as a security instrument, a negotiable bond, with the all-CFPS name serving as the commercial entity that represents the collateral.
And this leads to those theories about a secret government account.
Yes, the value of a citizen's lifetime labor is allegedly deposited into a secret Treasury direct account in the name of the straw man. The often futile attempt to discharge debts using the accepted for value, or A4V process, is the attempt to draw on those fictional trust funds.
So the anthropos and the oikonomos must fight against this entire complex, the prospon, the maritime myth, the sestuique vi trust. But they also face the immediate challenge in the courtroom of the Latin Wall, this idea of deliberate linguistic deception.
Language is viewed as a tool of theft. The historical stratification of English law after the Norman conquest created a trilingual court system. You had English, Latin, and law French,
which ensured the court was fundamentally alien to the common man.
It created a wall of specialized legal terms of art, and it made lawyers the only gatekeepers to justice.
And the sovereign citizen doctrine's response to this is something called syncretic etymology.
It's the practice of dismantling words to expose these hidden, malicious legal meanings. They believe the only way to expose the fraud is to break the code of the language itself.
Which leads to the most famous tactic in the doctrine, the understand trap.
This is where it gets really interesting.
A simple question from the judge. Do you understand? Can allegedly forfeit your sovereignty.
It's all about implied consent. When a judge asks, do you understand the charges, the doctrine dictates you must refuse to say yes.
Why?
The adherent parses the word understand literally as stand under.
Stand under, as in submit to.
An agreement to submit to the judge's authority and to the court's statutory jurisdiction. By agreeing to stand under the judge, they believe they have contracted away their sovereign rights on the spot.
Wait, I have to challenge that internal logic for a moment. Etymologists confirm that understand derives from Old English, meaning to stand in the midst of, which implies thorough knowledge, not submission. So why does the doctrine prioritize this literal submission-based parsing over the actual linguistic history of the word?
Because in this worldview, the court has already established a fictional context where language is specifically designed to trap you. The emphasis is on maintaining sovereignty by refusing any possibility of implied consent, no matter how remote.
So what's the correct response then?
The mandated response is often, I comprehend the words you are speaking, or sometimes, I overstand the meaning.
Overstand.
Yes, both of which linguistically suggest knowing the terms without submitting to the authority. It's a verbal attempt to maintain the anthropostatus under extreme pressure.
That linguistic separation extends directly to statutory law concerning travel, which ties perfectly back to our emporos versus oikonomos discussion, the distinction between a driver and a traveler.
This is a crucial, practical application of the doctrine. Statutory laws, like those requiring licenses and registration for a car, are seen as applying only to commercial activity. Therefore, the adherent must establish that they are not engaged in commerce on the public roads.
So driver is decoded via this syncretic etymology as drover, one who drives cattle to market, or metaphorically, one engaged in commerce.
Which means admitting you are engaged in commercial activity that is subject to license and regulation. Conversely, the traveler is the free man exercising an inherent God-given right to move freely on the land,
Not in a regulated motor vehicle.
but in a private conveyance,
Yeah.
and is therefore exempt from statutory licenses and registration because he is not an emporos, a merchant. He is the free anthropos operating as an oikonomos on the land, not on the sea of commerce.
This detailed analysis really reveals the comprehensive nature of the Vanguard legal defense doctrine. It seeks to counter the legal system at every single level of engagement,
From the capitalization on a document to the etymology of a word spoken by a judge.
all using the precise purity of the coined Greek lexicon.
And while, as we must neutrally state, these arguments are uniformly rejected by every court in the land, they're often categorized as organized pseudo-legal commercial arguments. The persistence and the internal complexity of the doctrine highlight a genuine, profound, modern alienation. It's the feeling of being governed by a system that speaks an alien language and prioritizes corporate fictions over human essence.
This has armed us with the full tactical knowledge of the Scourge lexicon.
This has indeed been a true war room briefing. We've mapped the system's cipher keys and we've deployed the coin Greek arsenal. We've analyzed the system's attempts to reduce the living man to a mask, the prospon,
And an heir's inheritance to a fragile commercial contract, the syntheca.
The ultimate goal, as these sources define it, isn't merely to win a court case. It's to reclaim fundamental identity and sovereignty. The core conclusion of the doctrine is clear and absolute. Learn the language of the king.
The defense is about enforcing covenant over contract.
And essence over role.
The entire strategy can really be synthesized into two principles of victory, which are the final decrees of the Scourge lexicon. These are the rules for surviving the legal fiction.
And the first principle of victory is this. When you speak diathoka, the syntheco burns.
The unbreakable will, or testament, based on an inherited, blood-sealed status, always supersedes the conditional, negotiable contract between two distrusting parties.
And the second principle. When you stand as anthropos, the prospon falls.
The living whole man rejects the authority asserted over the legal mask or the fictional corporate shell, eliminating the foundation of the state's jurisdiction.
We can conclude with the source's most provocative thought. It's a reflection on the tragic necessity of the mask.
Because legal scholars will argue that the person, the prospon, is a necessity for civilization. The law has to govern the unit of social account, the entity that pays taxes, enters contracts, and provides stability to the economy.
Of course. But the resonance of this critique, despite its factual inaccuracies regarding Roman law or the 1666 Act, is in its articulation of a modern spiritual and social displacement.
It's a vocabulary for that feeling.
It is. The doctrine provides a vocabulary for the feeling of being lost in a system that values the digital cage, the prosopon, over the living essence, the anthropos. The system sees a taxpayer. The doctrine demands recognition of the man.
This deep dive has armed you with a comprehensive knowledge of this lexicon and its arguments. You now know the difference between the three key battles: identity, relationship, and economics. So what stands out to you about the difference between managing the king's assets, the oikonomos, and being reduced to the cargo of commerce, the emporos?
It's a good question to leave with. Is the search for sovereignty in the end an attempt to reclaim stolen property, or is it something deeper entirely? The reclamation of identity and the rejection of a defined role. It's a profound question about consent and personhood that really transcends the legal arguments themselves.
Food for thought until our next deep dive. Thank you for joining us.
We'll see you soon.